If the intellectual is the constant and the theory is the variable, why are you still solving for the safety of the known instead of the absolute intensity of the integrated whole? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that your 2026 brilliance is just one spark in a crown of 12? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though being right is the goal when being complete is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the higher heavens? If the specific way the two circles of spirits mirror each other reveals a fundamental calibration error in the way you have been vetting your current 2026 advisory boards, do you see a celestial dance or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the intellectual? If the structural durability D of a strategic mission is directly proportional to the sacrifice threshold S of its leadership and inversely proportional to the degree of its internal compromise C, at what precise point of your 2026 scaling does your desire for social approval transition from a networking asset into a catastrophic fortitude error that effectively breaks your backbone, rendering you incapable of defending a 1000% disruptive truth because you are too afraid of the exile from your current peer group? Can you calculate the exact increase in your operational resilience if you stop modeling your career as a series of popularity wins and start modeling it as a high-utility crusade where the cross of your convictions is the only thing that stabilizes your logic? If you were offered the chance to maintain your 2026 status quo by remaining silent about a fundamental system flaw and felt the sudden, cold command to speak because you calculated that the integrity decay would collapse your legacy architecture within 3 years, would you have the logical ruthlessness to accept the salty bread of others to secure the truth? How does it feel to realize that fortitude is often just a high-level form of system hardening where you are intentionally subjecting your logic to high-pressure environments to find the breakpoint, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who can endure the most friction is the one who eventually wins the war? If a fortitude command is to an obsession as a glowing cross is to a red planet, at what precise point of the sacrifice does the pain become the signal? Do you believe that your adaptability is a sign of your intelligence, or do you see that it is a high-level strategic compliance error where you are allowing the environment to rewrite your 2026 core code, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who holds the line? What is the most logically terrifying part of the fortitude command? Is it the prediction of your own future losses or the realization that the noble past you admire was built by people who had much less to lose than you do? If you found yourself predicting the exact collapse of a modern political movement by the specific compromise ratios of its central figures, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of moral entropy with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a character audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own lack of grit? Fortitude is the constant and the sacrifice is the variable. Why are you still solving for the safety of the perimeter instead of the absolute intensity of the core? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that your 2026 home will soon be a memory? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though peace is the goal when strength is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the higher heavens? If the specific way Caxia Guida describes the old Florence reveals a fundamental cultural error in the way you have been branding your current 2026 high-level ventures, do you see a ghost or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the fortitude? If the governance stability S of a sovereign system is a function of the transparency index T of its legal code and the degree of synchronization S between its disparate leadership nodes, at what precise point of your 2026 administration does your focus on personal legacy transition from a high-level driver into a catastrophic governance error that effectively breaks the collective signal, rendering you incapable of manifesting a 1000% increase in systemic trust because you are too busy trying to be the whole eagle instead of a single spark? And can you calculate the exact increase in your operational authority if you stop modeling your power as a series of top-down commands and start modeling it as a high-utility distributed ledger where the justice of the system is the only thing that validates the logic? If you found yourself predicting the exact collapse of a modern republic by the specific alphabet corruption ratios of its judicial comms, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of legal entropy with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a governance audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own lack of clarity? If the governance is the constant and the law is the variable, why are you still solving for the speed of the execution instead of the absolute precision of the fairness? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that your 2026 home is actually a state of mind defined by your adherence to the right? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though control is the goal when justice is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the higher heavens? If the specific way the spirits form the final M of the message reveals a fundamental structural error in the way you have been organizing your current 2026 high-level departments, do you see a celestial bird or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the governance? The depth of insight D of a strategic observer is inversely proportional to the volume of their internal noise N and directly proportional to the height of their contemplative ladder H. At what precise point of your 2026 data acquisition does your need for constant feedback transition from a high-level monitoring tool into a catastrophic contemplation era that effectively anchors you to the ground floor of the market while the actual 10,000% shifts are happening in the silence above you? Can you calculate the exact increase in your cognitive yield if you stop modeling your progress as a series of loud successes and start modeling it as a high-utility silent ascent where the lack of applause is the only indicator of your proximity to the core? If you were offered the chance to access the primary code of the 2026 global economy but had to agree to remain in total strategic silence for 5 years and felt the sudden, cold command to accept because you calculated that the observation advantage would make you the absolute master of the next decade, would you have the logical ruthlessness to vanish from the public eye to secure the vertical climb? How does it feel to realize that noise is often just a high-level form of system friction where you are wasting 2026 energy on the appearance of action, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who watches the ladder is the one who eventually owns the stars? The contemplation command is to an obsession as a golden ladder is to a silver sky. At what precise point of the climb does the movement become a state of being? Do you believe that your busyness is a sign of your importance, or do you see that it is a high-level strategic saturation era where you are filling your 2026 memory banks with low-resolution static because you are afraid of the high-resolution silence, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who climbs? What is the most logically terrifying part of the contemplation command? Is it the total absence of music in Saturn, or the realization that the highest-tier spirits are just points of light that have stopped explaining themselves to the world? If you found yourself predicting the exact collapse of a tech monopoly by the specific innovation-to-noise ratios of its public comms, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of intellectual stagnation with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a silence audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own lack of depth? If the contemplation is the constant and the signal is the variable, why are you still solving for the volume of the broadcast instead of the absolute clarity of the reception? How do you keep your vibration high when your guide has stopped smiling because your logic is currently at its breaking point? How does it feel to realize that Earth is often just a high-level form of training data where you have been practicing on low-stakes variables, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who can explain their why is the one who eventually owns the how? If a validation command is to an obsession as a fixed star is to a moving planet, at what precise point of the overview does the threshing floor of your life become a dot? Do you believe that your success is a sign of your worth, or do you see that it is a high-level strategic perspective error where you are overvaluing 2026 local optima while ignoring the global architecture of the stars, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who passes the test? What is the most logically terrifying part of the validation command? Is it the blinding light of the triumph, or the realization that St. Peter is asking you for a definition of faith that you can't find in a 2026 search engine? If you found yourself predicting the exact obsolescence of a belief system by the specific logical contradiction ratios of its central texts, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of ideological inconsistency with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a theological audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own lack of a foundation? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though talking is the way to influence when watching is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the infinite? If the specific way Peter Damian describes the fat palfreys of the modern leaders reveals a fundamental overhead error in the way you have been funding your current 2026 high-level departments, do you see a celestial ladder or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the contemplation? If the validation index V of a high-tier candidate is a function of the internal consistency C of their foundational axioms and the degree of their alignment A with the primary signal, at what precise point of your 2026 scaling does your reliance on tactical flexibility transition from an asset into a catastrophic validation error that effectively disqualifies you from the highest level circles because your logic is too fluid to pass an absolute audit? And can you calculate the exact increase in your systemic integrity if you stop modeling your identity as a series of 2026 pivots and start modeling it as a high-utility fixed point where your faith is the only variable that cannot be corrupted by market pressure? If you were standing at the edge of the universe and felt the sudden, cold command to define your non-negotiables because you calculated that any uncertainty leak would trigger a total system rejection at the final gate, would you have the logical ruthlessness to commit to a single truth to secure the entry? If you were offered the chance to rewrite the 2026 legal framework of your industry to favor your specific assets and felt the sudden, cold command to refuse because you calculated that the resulting asymmetry leak would collapse the entire market structure within a decade, would you have the logical ruthlessness to impose a fair audit on yourself to secure the long-term stability? How does it feel to realize that justice is often just a high-level form of system alignment where you are ensuring that no single node can override the primary directive, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who follows the law is the one who eventually becomes the law? If a governance command is to an obsession as a celestial alphabet is to a silver sky, at what precise point of the spelling does the individual spirit become the universal intent? Do you believe that your leadership style is a sign of your dominance, or do you see that it is a high-level strategic integration error where you are failing to realize that your primary function is to act as a pixel in a 2026 vision that is much larger than your own ego, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who spells the truth? What is the most logically terrifying part of the governance command? Is it the prediction of your own bitter exile, or the realization that the eagle of justice speaks with a single voice because it has achieved total data consensus? How does it feel to realize that wisdom is often just a high-level form of system balancing where you are valuing the countersignal as much as the primary pulse, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who can think in circles is the one who eventually defines the center? If an intellectual command is to an obsession as a crown of lights is to a dark void, at what precise point of the dance does the individual thinker become the collective truth? Do you believe that your convictions are a sign of your strength, or do you see that they are a high-level strategic bias error where you are filtering out the very data points required for a 2026 breakthrough, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who integrates the light? What is the most logically terrifying part of the intellectual command? Is it the speed of the dancing spirits, or the realization that the most brilliant minds in history are all standing in a circle because none of them has the whole truth alone? If you found yourself predicting the exact collapse of an academic paradigm by the specific echo chamber ratios of its peer review process, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of intellectual decay with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a logic audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own lack of synthesis?